That's Mike's hot. Okay. 10:30, Finance Committee special meeting on Tuesday, the 16th of August. We'll start the meeting here at 10:30 a.m. Do we have anybody calling in, Chris? And that would be no. All right. Committee and public comments. I don't see any. Okay, on to number 3, and I'm assuming Director Rotoro will be leading this discussion. I just wanted to give a little preamble here, if it's not already obvious. We're trying to get ready for the upcoming rate study, and there were a few items that have been raised during the past year that wanted to be discussed today, perhaps including the most important piece is whether we do a pay-as-you-go or increase our debt service to ease the rate, anticipated rate increases based on all the capital equipment improvements that we're facing. A few other items here that Stan has captured in a handout that is just headed out. So I'll let you take the lead on that, Stan, and I'll reserve the right to weigh in with comments as we go.
Interrupt whenever you feel like you want to, and that goes for the staff as well. We might as well get these things on the table and talk through them. Obviously, the intent is to be ready to brief the full board, not the details, but the top level, so that we're all on the same page before we start going down any road and get down so far that there's no time to get back on the road. Most of the stuff that I've got on this sheet, and it's 11 pages long, but only the first 5 pages are really the top level items and issues in terms of setting guidance and direction. The other is backup, trying to justify some of the things I'm suggesting. Most of what is in here, I believe, is directly in line with what I've heard most of the board members say, but we still obviously want to go through it and then give it to the board and let them determine. And I'll be very clear where I'm sort of going away from or on a tangent to what the board has already discussed, I think. First of all, the salaries will remain competitive in terms of the inflation. We're going to increase our rates to support whatever we need to do to make sure that we are competitive in this labor market. Second of all, the large capital investments will be paid for with increased debt service. This is counter to that last report that we saw. Now, my own input is that we should limit the debt service increase to like 0.9, 1.0, or $1.1 million per year. And that has 2 major assumptions associated with it. First of all, since I didn't get a capital improvement suggested list, I picked my own, and it came to $11.2 million. So that's one major assumption. Obviously, the projects can change as long as they fit within that $11.2 million.
Those 3 that you selected look like they were the first 3 that
right,
Krieger and
that
Stewart
came
had
out of the
recommended.
general plan.
So
right.
we're assuming that those first 3 would be the same.
Right, but there has been some discussion.
That list is a
among the
work in
staff.
progress, and yeah, we've reprioritized some of those projects, so I think
Okay.
your assumption.
So when we get to that, we'll make sure that we get that included. The other major assumption that goes along with that is, first of all, the capital spending of 11.2 million. The second one is I looked at interest rates from 1.1% per year to 3.5% per year, which I think covers, I certainly hope, the broad spectrum that we'll be looking at. But this is subject, this number of 0.91 or $1.1 million increase is subject to those assumptions being correct, or at least close to being correct.
Which interest rates are these?
The The interest rates would be on the loan that we would be taking out for paying for the
Okay.
capital improvements.
Are these rates based on anything? I haven't seen any rates that low.
I don't know if I put tie on the distribution or not, but the state revolving fund this year in 2022 is at 1.1%.
I did look, I don't know if I was on that distribution, but I have researched into the SRF loan program, and I doubt we would even qualify. They have a ranking list, and we'd be at the very bottom for any sort of funding that the state revolving fund would give us. So they would fund all the projects higher on the list before they get to us. I don't
Yeah,
know
and
that's
that,
a
of course, is
viable
one of the
option.
major issues we need to resolve early on. The city right now is going after a state revolving fund loan for the wastewater treatment plant. The state puts out billions of dollars a year for the state revolving fund. This basically is our money. What they're doing is taking our money and then giving it back to us with strings, and we pay low interest. So I would certainly agree that that's a critical issue that we need to resolve up front.
Right, and it's something we can look at, but I'm just saying,
And we
don't
need-
count on it.
So the plan
Oh.
for the worst, knowing what other interest rates might be.
But I think we'd have to be very lucky to get any funding out of the SRF.
Prioritization goes
Yeah,
to, for
well-
example, disadvantaged communities or places where they've completely lost their water service, wells have gone
Right,
dry, things like
right.
that. So they have top priority.
They do. You're absolutely right. They do have priority, but when they're giving out billions of dollars a year, when you compare the interest rate that they have to the interest rate that we can get otherwise, we cannot just ignore them. So,
No, but I think I don't think it's be wise to assume that we're going to have that kind of interest rate.
no, absolutely right. I agree. We don't want to assume it. That's why we'll handle that in another page or two.
So if we were to make the plan around what would be an expected interest rate and apply for a state revolving or state revolving fund application and we're be awarded it, then that would just work in our advantage, but we'd have everything in place in anticipation of what the real costs might be.
Absolutely,
and then-
that's the direction I would take.
And then, do we have any idea from well, we don't have past experience ourselves in this area, but others, how long it takes to apply, to receive a state revolving fund once the application's in place?
What the city was seeing when they started theirs about 10 years ago was they figured it would take a year to a year and a half.
Once they made the application?
And it's because you have to have the preliminary design done, which on a distribution line, which is what I have in my capital improvements. We'll take a look at what Don has done. The preliminary design should be very simple. The EPA work should also be very simple. So I would think that it would be, less than if you were building a wastewater treatment plant, where it would be fairly complex.
Yeah, because our earth is already disturbed and we've.
Yeah, it's already disturbed, there's already a line there, we've already got all the easements in place, everything else. My thinking is that it would take us less time to do our side of the work. Now, you do have to get in line with the state revolving fund, and you don't get your money until they get to that point. But because we are obviously not shovel-ready, but we are close to being where we need to be, it seems to me we ought to, but like Ty mentioned, what we need to do is I don't want to just, we can't do it, okay? We can't do it. What we need to do is find out what the real issues are and see what's going on, all right? And that's one of the points I get to in the back. Okay, so, and the reason that even then the number is between 0.9 and 1.1 is we need to make sure that there is sufficient debt service capacity to ensure flexibility. We don't want to be marginal. And I think that's kind of what Ty was saying. And we need to get the board's preference on this as, not necessarily as soon as possible, but at least in the near future, because we got to start making some decisions. Okay, and my feeling is we need to commit to at least one major project and hopefully one or more additional projects. And what all of the analysis does is looks at up to basically 3 projects. And we'll get into that in more detail when we get to the numbers.
So the list we have right now in the capital improvement plan includes, I think, 5 projects?
I think the general plan lists about a dozen.
Yeah.
Or more. What I've done is picked out from one of the early pages what Krieger and Stewart said were, these are the things you really need to focus
Right,
on,
right.
and that'll take us up to the next 10 or so years without having a major crisis. And then they referenced a certain page in the general plan that identified specific, and they were all pipelines, as I recall. Let me see.
And so, just clarity on the commit to a minimum of 1 major capital improvement project. Are you thinking that annually, or?
No,
one project?
that would be for this go-around, this 5-year period. And that, it turns out, is I think everybody would agree, would be the Springer pipeline. I hope that's what you came up with. It doesn't really matter as long as it fits within that $11.2 million spending region. You see what I'm saying is, the analysis works on how much money do we need to borrow, how much, what do we need to have in terms of repayment over the years. And so as long as it's under that $11.2 million, it doesn't matter if it's 1 project or 5 projects. But because I had to have something, I went back to the general plan and said, this is what Krieger and Stewart said were the 3 primary initial projects.
Okay.
How flexible are you on that number? Because those numbers listed are 2021 prices. So how flexible are you on the 11.2? Because we're no longer.
We're going to get to that. And actually, it's very flexible.
Okay.
Assuming that the interest rates are between 1.5 and 3.5.
Okay.
And that's still subject to, uncertainty, obviously. You can't argue with that.
What were the numbers that Mark offered, interest rates, when we heard from him?
Well, I think Mark only said that the state revolving fund was giving out loans at 3%. But that doesn't mean anything if you can't get a state revolving fund. But then you go into the website, and the Water Board's website says 1.1%. So there's a discrepancy there as well. The highest interest rate that the state revolving fund has been at in the last 22 years is 2.6%. And of course, we're living in uncertain times. And of course, that goes back to the next bullet. Primary unknowns are interest rate and inflation rate. Now, we can't get around that. But on the other hand, we have to make some assumptions about the inflation rate. Otherwise, we can't have a budget. And the same thing goes for the interest rate.
So if we were to estimate an inflation rate that's more than actual inflation, we can always do less. But we can't go in with a number
that gives
that's less than inflation and go more. Is that correct? So we're better off in our process here to make sure that we got things covered with a buffer just in case.
And you're talking with respect to establishing the rate increases. Yes, you can always go lower, but you can't go higher once you establish them.
Okay.
Well, and yes, and as far as every year, we have the choice of either accepting or not accepting an interest rate increase. by Prop 218. I think there have been once or twice in the past history where we didn't accept that interest rate. But with the uncertainty going on right now regarding inflation, once we get a loan, obviously that's fixed. You know, that's not going to change. But the inflation rate, we don't know. So I don't think you can count on not going for, you know, an increase on any given year.
Right.
But we do have that flexibility. It would be very nice to assume that maybe we didn't have to take it. I'm just doubtful at this point in time.
I agree.
It's
That
not-
would happen.
It's not binary, though. I don't want anybody to think that it's binary. You can accept up to that amount.
Not up, no, I believe Jim Worth indicated at our last meeting, we talked about that, is, no, it wasn't up to, it was, you either accept what it was or you reject it. I think it's a 0 or 1, I believe.
I think we're talking to the inflation rate that we would be considering for salaries. And if we were to set an inflation rate that was higher than the actual inflation rate, we don't have to give the higher number to the employees,
I'm speaking about the actual rates, the water rates.
the water rates.
Yeah, let's say you propose a 3% increase, but then something says that, you know what, we only need to do 2% to cover our costs. You can accept a 2% increase.
Right. That's my understanding as well.
You just can't go above.
That's what I said, wasn't it?
I'm not sure. Are we in agreement or not? My understanding is every time you get to a new budget and you're authorized to take an increase, you either accept it or you don't. You don't take a percentage of that increase. That was what.
Are you
Jim
talking about
Moore told us
for
last
rate
time.
increases?
For the rate increases from
No,
year to
you can
year.
change, you can change it. For example, if you set a 5% rate increase for next year and the financials indicate that you don't need that 5%, you can go 4%, 3%, 2%, anything, but you can't go above that 5%.
Okay, now that wasn't my understanding.
That's the way,
So what we need to do is, since I thought I heard Jim say that, we need to contact Jim to make sure that,
Jim knows that. We've had this discussion before.
yeah,
You can always go lower, but you can't go higher.
It's actually good news. Unless we.
well, that would make sense. It's just not what my understanding was that we were told. Because that does make a difference. Okay. Okay, that's good to know. And then with regard to the loans, if we go with the state revolving fund, we probably would have an option of going with the 2023 interest rates or deferring to the 2024 if they look like they're going to be lower. And again, the highest rate the state has had is 2.6%. So that sounds very positive, but we'll get to that. And we do need, last bullet on the first page is we do need the capital investment priorities. And I think Don's already ready to give us something a little later. We'll get to that if you're ready.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. And included, we also, not only do we need the updated priorities, but we need to have some pre-loan costs and then updated total costs and then a loan schedule. No loan are we going to get tomorrow. It takes, no matter what kind of a loan we get, it takes a while to get it. So we need to make sure that we understand that as well.
So maybe this is a good point to pause for a second. Stan, thank you. When Mark went in and prepared the document he prepared for, I forget the name of it, but
Financial analysis.
financial analysis before, there was an assumption going in that pay-as-you-go, not debt service, would be his recommendation. Could we talk just a little bit about, because our track history shows that we have taken on debt history or debt for like the solar field and other projects in the past. So we're not against debt, but for some reason, it didn't even come up in the discussion this time. Can you give some background on that?
So Mark prepared two scenarios, and you saw those. Both, one was a cash funded, and one was a debt service funded, which financed a portion of the CIP. When looking at the numbers, it was just staff's opinion that we'd save money on interest if we didn't do the debt service. So it was either way. He prepared both ways. We've presented both ways, and like I said, that was just staff's recommendation.
Did he have do you recall the interest rate that was included in that analysis?
I don't remember how much he put for the.
I think it was 3 point something.
Could be. I don't remember off the top of my head what it was.
Well, historically, we know that the solar loan, based upon the audit report, was 3.5% for 20 years. We know that for a fact. And in the audit report also indicates that the COP 2018 is a 30-year loan at, the words were 4 to 5%. Now, I don't know how you get a loan that's between 4 and 5%, but it's not a standard loan either. So, you know, but the difference between a 4% loan and a 5% loan is humongous.
It's because you have different series of bonds that you sell that have different lengths of time, so they have different interest rates associated with them.
So the interest, I just pulled it up, the interest rate assumed was 3% on a 30-year loan.
I said the audit report says 4 to 5%.
Oh, this was in his analysis. The question I was asking earlier, that what interest rate did Mark use in his analysis?
Mark used 3%?
The Mark's analysis, he used 3%, yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Last year
Well,
was lower rates. Not so much right now, but yeah, last year when we were putting this together, the end of the calendar year, it was lower rates at the time.
Okay. Well, my analysis does actually go as high as 3.5, so it fits in that area. So, but again, assuming we can get a 3% rate, and obviously we need to follow up on a lot of stuff, and unfortunately there's not a lot of time. That's where we've kind of put ourselves into a corner. So in any event, I'm sorry, you ready to go on? Okay. The yearly cash capital investment is to be capped at something, it's like we've done in previous years. And obviously that needs to be negotiated with the staff, seeing, you know, what our history is and what we think our future is compared with our history. And that, however, would not include the preliminary design work that would have to come out of the cash capital. I wouldn't want the design work coming out of to be included in the permanent cash capital funding area, but it does need to be included for those years that we need to have it. And reserves to be used to cover emergencies primarily, and unknowns such as Sigma adjudication and new water supply. One of the things that was in Mark's report is he allowed the reserve level to go down significantly, $6 or $8 million. I didn't hear anybody in the board indicate that that was a favorable thing to do. Next point is that the pumping levels will account for new state laws and Sigma. That is, our pumping's going to go down. We want to make sure that we don't assume we're going to pump so much and then only pump 80% of that and end up on the short end like we did back in 2010 or 2011. We got into financial trouble because we asked people to conserve, and lo and behold, they did. And then we had financial problems for a year or more. So in any event, what we need to do, even though the new state laws obviously are not fixed, we don't know exactly what they're going to be, we need a number. So we need to have an estimate of what we're going to be allowed to pump for the residential, which is the primary pumping that we have.
And so, and consistent with earlier discussions, we'd want to be conservative there where the number we pick would be.
Right, right. And of course, right now, the state laws are not dominating what's happening. Our pumping rate right now, I believe, is being dominated by Sigma. That is, we've doubled our unit cost of water, and that has taken a drastic reduction, not drastic, a fairly large reduction in water pumping. And obviously, that can't keep up forever. I mean, once you get to a point where you've taken out all your grass and you've you've dropped back from a 20-minute shower to a 10-minute shower, there's not a whole lot more you can conserve, but it is going to be going down for a few more years before it levels off, is my feeling, and we need to somehow accommodate that in our planning of it going down. And of course, the good news is that will also reduce the replenishment fee. And since we don't actually get the replenishment fee, it goes to the GA. It doesn't hurt us. And any reduction in water, as long as our rates are about the same as the replenishment fee, the person who takes the hit is going to be the GA, not us.
Just so while you're pausing there, I hate to keep bouncing around.
I had to take a breath.
Hate to keep bouncing around here, but something just occurred to me when, so Mark has prepared two plans. One was a debt service based and one was cash carry.
The report only had one, though.
Yeah, we only saw one, but we could probably get the other one if we just ask, right?
Well, he is waiting for choosing one of those two to
Sure.
prepare the final report. So, yeah, it would change some stuff in it.
Do you recall what the debt service amount was that like Stan is suggesting?
Amount of interest that would be paid?
Well, the amount of debt that we would incur to implement that plan. You know, Stan pointed out 1 million plus minus 100,000 is the goal. I'm assuming that Mark had a larger debt service number.
Oh, so the interest and principal paid every year? I don't remember. I'd have to pull that out.
Well, a lot of that is dependent upon how many capital projects you do in how many years. So I limited mine to 3 major ones in a 5-year period. And I believe Mark might have had double that number.
Mark had exactly what we told him to put in there. So it wasn't Mark arbitrarily setting that schedule. But yeah, it was consistent with the capital improvement plan that was approved by the board in June, those same dates in there for the capital projects.
And I'm assuming since there's more projects in there, the debt service is higher.
Would be higher. Mhm.
And that might make the analysis of a debt service comparison to going cash carry, look really bad. So
Correct.
maybe by spreading out the projects, doing-
Yeah, I don't know, because the 11 million you're talking about, Stan, is over a 5-year period?
Yes.
And what's the total of the CIP?
The CIP it was 30.
20?
I think it was more than 20.
Okay, because that's over 10 years, so they may be relatively closer than you're thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, and now when we get to the analysis, it turns out that the $1 million, depending upon the interest rate, of course, I mean, it all depends on interest rate. We could actually cover $18 or $20 million worth of capital improvements, but there you're talking about a very optimistic interest rate to get to that, okay? And even though I'm suggesting that we look primarily at the 0.91 or 1.1. Not all of that gets spent if indeed the interest rate is low. It's in the worst case, for flexibility, I wanted to make sure that the 0.9 would cover it, even no matter what. Okay, so, but you actually got to look at the numbers to get a good feel for that.
And one more break, sorry, Stan. I didn't mention this at the beginning of the meeting, but I did make a commitment as we set this meeting up that we would be concluded by noon. There are some of the staff have commitments at noon, so that's our preferred timeline today.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, what I want the work that we do to investigate the rate increases due to inflation and CIP separately. That is, I want the board to understand that we've looked at, what's the effect of inflation, what's the effect of the improvement plan, the capital improvement plan. It was in the report, it was sort of mashed together, so you couldn't tell what increases were due to inflation and what increases were due to the capital improvement plan, and also not spelled out or maybe even acknowledged was the reduction in cost due to the replenishment fee going down by several $100,000. So we want to make sure that the board, we keep them apprised of why things happen. Now, this is it. They want options and they want understanding, and that's what we need to give them. The board has indicated they want to have options. So I want to give them multiple rate structure scenarios, and it's going to be up to us to decide what's reasonable. Part of it's going to be, how much time does Mark have to spend on our work, and how difficult is it to do some of these variations in various scenarios. Hopefully, all of his numbers are in Excel, so a lot of this shouldn't take a lot of time or a lot of effort, but not knowing exactly how all of his programming is set up, some takes shorter period of time than others.
It would be helpful if the board would give some directions to what sort of alternatives you're looking at so that Mark.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what I want to do is give the same presentation to the board, and at that point in time saying, hey, if you have some ideas, now's a good time to let us know, what those options are.
And we're going to try to address that Thursday. We've asked Jim to include a open session, 15-minute, quick engagement with the board about today's discussion. Okay. So we can kind of hopefully speed things up a bit, because we understand the time crunch that we're coming up against.
Yeah.
And so we've got two scenarios right now. One's a cash scenario and one's a debt service scenario that Mark has put together. So I'm guessing that maybe we only have to have a third, maybe, or how many are you thinking?
Well, actually, there's more than that. I mean, there's in my mind, what we need to do is Chuck was very vehement, that is this Chuck as opposed to that Chuck, about the number of projects that we include. Right. And so what Mark has done, I think, was a very optimistic view of, hey, let's do everything right now. And frankly, we can't. I mean, the bottom line is there's not enough money to do everything that was in the general plan. And Krieger, Chuck Krieger said, we can spread this out. This is not, in my mind, the only thing in the general plan that stuck out in my mind was the Springer pipeline. That, and of course, we need to have further input from the staff if they came up with other projects, but.
So I understand that. All I was trying to point out is
To be clear, though, the annual capital outlay was based on the capital improvement plan that the board approved. Mark didn't do anything to that, so
And that was over 10 years.
over 10 years, and it's not the general plan covered longer than that.
Yeah. Well, but that doesn't mean that we can't spread it out.
I'm just trying to get my hands around how many,
Yeah. See,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
hold on. Please. I'm just trying to get my hands on, around how many different scenarios we're looking at. We have two. One's funded all with cash. One's funded all with debt service with an assumed 3% rate, we think. And then the third might be the one that you're proposing, which is like 3 projects or 2 projects. Is there?
well, a minimum of 3 is
So is that-
what I was proposing.
would that-
And depending upon the interest rate, go up to 4 or 5.
Would that embrace, or would that encompass all of the,
Well,
kind of got 2 worst scenarios,
I think
right?
as major, yes, although there'll also be internal, that is, as the top level, probably yes. Internally, where you start getting down to talking about, which is, how much are we expending and how much is the revenue? Okay, now, once you get down past that level, then you start talking about the rate structure per se, and what happens to the rates depending upon how you allocate things to tiers, how you allocate things between fixed costs and commodity costs, that kind of thing. So there could be an early set of trade-offs that talk about only revenue and expenses related to cash funding, debt funding with lots of stuff versus cash funding and debt funding with a significantly reduced, where you, instead of doing it over 5 years, you do it over 10 years. Or you spread it out over 10 years or 12 years. Because as I recall, in the general plan, what there was is a break between 2025 and 2035. And something had to, there was nothing between 2025 and 2035. And so it's just a matter of, saying when, and I was hoping that was what Chuck Krieger and the staff was going to talk about, is when does this stuff really need to be done? When does it become critical, and what's a nice to have? And so hopefully we got all that information now. But there, I would agree, again, at the top level, in the terms of top level, that would seem reasonable to have cash funding, debt funding of everything versus capital, cash funding and debt funding of
A smaller set.
a smaller subset. And again, it does go back to interest rate. You cannot ignore, because under, even at $1 million, depending upon the interest rate, we could fund a half a dozen or more projects, not just 3. The other issue is, how many projects can the staff cope with in any 5-year period? We took, 8 years to do the well 35? We have to be reasonable in terms of what we want to put the staff through in any 5-year period. And I would suggest going to more than 3 or 4 projects than any major projects anyway. Anything over $1 million might be just more than we can probably tolerate.
What's been our track history? What's a comfortable level of capital improvement projects annually that we can point to in the past and say, this was a happy spot? I suspect during the earthquake, we had maybe a few more than we were comfortable with.
Well, right now we have 3 tanks and a booster station going in, so, yeah, 4 projects. We've had in the past, see, it was 06, we had 2 pipelines and 2 tanks going in. So we can handle multiple
So,
projects, and it does span several years time frame too. It doesn't all happen in one year. There's the planning and there's the plans, then you're going out to bid and awarding the contract and the getting started, and there's always delays. So it takes several years to get these projects done. So,
Okay, thanks.
So I concur, you know, those might be reasonable things to do. Again, we're sort of committing Mark to do something in a very small amount of time. So what we need to do is make sure we get an input. And it may be very straightforward. You know, I don't know. And then the last bullet on this second page is risk analysis, perform a risk analysis, modeling the impact of higher than expected inflation and lower than anticipated water usage, just to get a feel for, you know, what are we looking at? What is the risk? Because we don't want to put ourselves in a position that we were in previously. Well, I think we actually had to lay off a couple people, not desirable.
9.
More than a couple,
And,
yeah.
and we certainly want to make sure that we keep our people paid at the going rates. Okay, on to page 3. I believe it was early on in the general plan, much prior to table 5.3A, it called out there was 3 pipelines that needed to be looked at, fixed, replaced, or maybe if not, maybe, I don't even know if they're there. If not, maybe replacement, I mean, maybe it's a new pipeline, I don't know. But anyway, those are the 3 that the general plan indicated were, you know, Krieger's preference. And it's still up to the board, but I would think that generally speaking, we would follow what Krieger thought was the logical.
Okay, so I can add to that. So we had a call, a virtual meeting, web meeting with Krieger and Stewart last week. As we'd indicated, our intent was to put together a list of prioritized projects, the top 3 that you asked for. And they took the initiative to put together a list for us to discuss during that call. We went over the list with staff. Staff met subsequent after that. And it's still a work in progress, but based on staff recommendations, we've changed things around a little bit. And as you point out, Krieger and Stewart did this list based on the general plan, which has a longer time frame than the 10-year capital improvement plan. So consequently, some things are different. For example, on their prioritized list, they included some well replacements, which we don't have on the 10-year plan. So with regards to your 3 pipeline projects, and again, a work in progress, but based on prioritizations that we've discussed as a staff, the Springer pipeline remains number 1. The 30-inch Bowman pipeline is now priority 5, and the Gateway Boulevard pipeline is number 2. Now, there's some other things on there that have moved around, and even on the capital improvement plan, we've shifted a couple projects around. For example, the Springer line was supposed to start spending on fiscal year 2025. Well, we need to do design and do the preliminary work and move that up to fiscal year 2024. And the Springer to Gateway was shown in fiscal year 2024, and we've shifted that over to 2025. So again, it's a work in progress. We're working on the list, but there are some changes to what you've presented here and what Krieger presented, because again, they did it based on the general plan, and we're looking at the 10-year approved financial capital improvement plan schedule.
And you said the number 3 might be a
Well, for now,
well improvement?
based on the revised list, as I said, number 1 would be the Springer. Number 2 would be the Gateway Boulevard pipeline. Number 3 is a Ridgecrest Heights booster replacement. Number 4, the Bowman Pressure Reduction Station.
I'm sorry, 4 is what?
The Bowman Pressure Reduction Station. And then number 5 is that Bowman pipeline. That was number 2 on the list that you have here. And
And what
they're
is,
actually the top 11 projects were prioritized by Krieger and Stewart on the list they gave us, and we've shifted some things around on our list. But we haven't had the follow-up discussion with Krieger and Stewart yet, which we will have.
okay, okay, I'm sorry. So you have not talked to Krieger and Stewart about the modified?
Not yet, no.
No, okay. And what, and again, it doesn't, specific projects are not as important as what the cost of those projects are relative to, you know, I had to go with something, so it's 11.2 million. What do the top 3, the current top 3, the current top 4, and the current top 5 total cost?
Or said differently, what's the booster cost? and
You
what's
could,
the-
Don, you
what's
could,
pressure
you could
reduction?
probably put in a 2.5 million for the booster, just because that's what Gateway's projected at, so if you want to add them up.
Okay, so the new number 3 is 2.5 mil?
Yeah, that's just based on what Gateway's currently costing us.
Okay, so for the top 3 projects, it would be 3.4, 5.8, and 7.
About 8.4.
Be 8.3, 8.4 for the top 3
But once again, those are preliminary.
preliminary
They
numbers.
probably need to
Yeah,
be
that's fine.
refined
Be
more.
updated.
Well, we have to go with something. I mean, if your preliminary is better than our guess, all right? So,
Then add, if you asked for top 4 and top 5, is that what you're asking for?
and the top, what is the top,
To that total,
Four.
the number 4 would add another 125,000.
125,000?
I'm sorry.
25, yes. And then to
I'm sorry,
add to
could you come
that,
again on that?
excuse me,
The number 4 is a Bowman station?
Bowman Pressure Reduction Station,
Oh,
yes.
pressure reduction. Oh. Okay, that's the new valve. There, okay.
And then number 5 was the Bowman Pipeline, which you have on there, so that's another roughly $5.4 million onto that total.
Right, 5.4. And number 4, is that the 175,000 one?
125.
125,
Yes.
okay. See, I was kind of thinking that would fit inside
Yeah,
the,
but again, keep in mind, we haven't talked to Krieger and Stewart, so these are preliminary numbers.
yeah,
Those said
well,
it's
no,
a
but
work in
that's not
progress.
unreasonable, though. I just didn't, hoping you were going to come back with $20 million or $25 million. The 125 was, I was kind of assuming we would fund that out of cash capital, or at least that's an option, to fund out of cash capital, depending upon what our cash capital budget is. That's why we need to know what we think the capital, long-term capital budget is and the cash capital budget. But I don't see 120. If you look at the analysis, quite frankly, $125,000 gets sort of lost, to be quite honest.
Don't round off hairs.
Okay. Okay, yeah, there's no problem with updating this before we get to the brief the board on these numbers.
Our intent was to have this list finalized with Krieger and Stewart by the next scheduled Finance Committee meeting,
Well,
prior to the board meeting.
yeah. Unfortunately, the next finance committee meeting is still too far away. We've got a severe,
It's a week before the 45-day public hearing
Yeah.
starts for the rate study. So this
yeah.
is,
I'm more than happy to go with what they've come up with even before. We got to have something that's more current than what we got. So what we need to do is use the best information we've got, which is what Don just gave us.
yeah, the good news is it's not a larger number than you've already estimated.
Well, slightly larger if you go with 5 rather than 3.
Right.
Slightly lower if you go with 3, but again, the only reason I picked the 3 is because that was what the general plan said in that one paragraph. You do this and you're in good shape. All right, there was no, there's no magic about 11.2 million. Okay, so if we go on, and this is helpful, go on to actions. The first one is what Ty brought up earlier, is the uncertainty associated with the state revolving fund. We need to get better information on exactly where that stands. Mark, he threw out a number of 11%, 3%. Didn't seem to think that was difficult to get a state revolving fund. That's what his numbers were based on. My feeling is that the 3%, assuming you can get one, 3% is high, based upon the fact that it's never been more than 2.6% in the last 22 years. But, you know, we're not living in normal times either. But that's why my numbers go out to 3.5%.
Mark wasn't quoting state revolving fund, though, was he? I thought he was talking.
What he said was his people, he had other accounts that were getting 3%
Right.
from the state revolving fund.
Okay, I didn't hear the state revolving fund
Yeah,
reference.
I don't know, but the reality is when we're doing this rate study, we're gonna, I would hope, assume a higher rate as if we were bonding or something. And then if we come in under, great, but that way we're prepared for if we do not qualify for a state revolving fund.
Well, it's a function of when we actually see the numbers, what they come out to be.
Right,
Because-
but that's what I'm saying. A state revolving fund will, if we get it, will absolutely be less than what a bond, if we go out for a bond.
Right.
But
We have to plan
we-
for the worst.
Yeah, we got to plan for the worst, so that number,
Well-
though important, doesn't mean anything to the
Well,
analysis.
either that, or we agree that we will push, in my mind, over the next 10, 12 years, we're gonna have two separate bonds for a group of 5, 3, 4, 5 here, and 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now. All right? We're not going to do crunch 12 projects up into these next 3 or 4 years and expect our ratepayers to accept that. Because Krieger and Stewart didn't give any indication that you needed to. All right? There's no need to do it.
But we're only doing a rate study for 5 years.
Yes.
Right, so we wouldn't be doing or talking about or incorporating that second issuance of debt. We would just be looking at
Right.
that first.
Right, but what we could do is, you know, if indeed we plan on getting, say, $13 million, and it turns out that the interest rate is too high, we can accept a lesser amount of money and go with one less project and put that off for the next grouping, when the interest rates will presumably be less. Because we are at a high interest rate period now. You know, we've got some things we need to do, and it sounds like to me that the top 3 are less than 11.2.
Currently.
Doesn't mean we shouldn't, if interest rate's reasonable, not go with 5 or 6, but not necessarily, if we have to take a standard loan, or whatever you want to call a standard loan, is that a correct terminology, or?
Now, typically on a capital improvement project, you're looking at bonding or certificates of
Bond?
participation.
Okay, if we have to go with a bond rather than the state revolving fund, we back our expectations back. One, if we were saying we want to do 5, we back our expectations down to 4 or 3. And therefore, we can still, with the same amount of money, you know, do everything we need to do for the 3, as long as the 4th one isn't critical. And of course, I would hope that we would put the critical ones up front, and those are the ones we make real sure we fund. So there's different ways of doing it, I guess. But you know, what we need, I guess we do need to have an idea of what a bond would cost, just to see what it would do in terms of dropping us back, because the analysis is pretty trivial. Excel can do that kind of stuff all day long, with very little effort, but we have to know what the bounds are.
Is it possible to have a rough estimate on that? I know there's a lot of uncertainties, but we're planning to have this discussion this Thursday with the board in an abbreviated meeting ahead of the GM discussions.
By then, I don't know, but I can reach out to our financial advisor to see what current rates at our,
Well-
our bond rating
Yeah,
are
because
coming in at.
we kind of have a running bond rating. Matter of fact, didn't we do an investigation into that last year that might still be valid?
Yeah, we just did the 3-year update, yeah. So he can give us what they're going for right now.
It doesn't need to be a 100% number. It's just something to get us, hey, if it's 6% or if it's 3%.
Just so our analysis bounds what we need to bound. And it doesn't have to be this year, because I don't see us necessarily even getting a loan this year. It could be in 2023. As a matter of fact, if we went to the state revolving fund, the odds were in my mind, the odds are very low that we would get all the paperwork done to get the loan in 2020, before the fourth quarter of 2023, and maybe shift into 2024. But, then the question is, what's a bond gonna cost in that time frame?
But yeah, I can get what the going rate is as of this week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We can't read the future, but we can get
Well,
what's,
yeah, see, that's the problem is, this is a bad year.
we can hedge it, but
Yeah, well,
Look
yeah.
at the trend perhaps, if it's going up 10% per month, it,
Well, actually, depending upon who you talk to, the inflation rate's actually going down a little. And for sure, if you look at the housing market, the housing loans, which I actually trust better than the people who are claiming what the inflation rate is, because if they're a Democrat, they're one thing, if they're Republican, they're another thing. But, the people who are setting the rates for the housing market are real people, and they're there to make money, and so in my mind, they're probably more realistic. If theirs are going down, then interest rates are going down, regardless of what somebody from Washington says or what color they are. That is either blue or red.
for the
Don't
clarification.
trust any of them. So in any event, we need to have, somebody who we can count on to get good information on the state revolving fund. My understanding is that Chuck Krieger has an employee that deals with this. Are you familiar with that by any chance?
No, I think probably our bond counsel would probably be better to,
Well, bond counsel would understand bonds. I don't think a bond counsel, as a matter of fact, the last thing he wants to do is deal with the state revolving fund. That's his competition. That's the fox guarding the hen house. I want a real,
Okay.
somebody who really understands state revolving fund.
But once again, what does this have to do with the rate study right now? Because we're gonna put in information as a worst case scenario, if you will, if we go out for COP. Obviously, anything we put in for a COP is gonna be greater than the state revolving loan rate. So the information's important when we go to apply, but for the rate study, it doesn't
It probably
hold
doesn't.
value.
It doesn't need to happen right now,
Right.
but knowing that, I agree with you, we have to plan for the worst. If we're gonna
Yeah.
do debt service, we better
No,
know.
again,
what
yes
the-
and no.
Well, we need to know what the interest rate could
We
be.
do know how bad it could be.
Well, we don't. What we don't know. That's why we're
And I
asking.
And I think Ty can get that.
He's gonna get that.
What we need to be able to tell the board is what's the likelihood that that's gonna happen? And we won't know that without having better information about the state revolving fund.
I don't think we're gonna be able to give them a likelihood number though, right? Any better than what we currently have. We know we're not in a priority level for state revolving fund. We don't meet the disadvantaged community. We're not, we've got
Well,
problems
yeah, I
here,
think
but.
you're, no.
Well, but.
That's
if-
just being real negative.
For the rate study, though, we have to include
Yeah.
the number that's going to be the highest. The worst-case analysis has to include,
It has to include it. I
right,
agree.
and this other stuff is ancillary. It's important, but and if it happens, we get a state revolving fund, that's awesome. But if we can't base the rates on getting a state revolving
No,
fund, Stan,
no, I'm not saying we should.
that's all I'm saying. And so we're working on the
Well-
rate study right now.
I'm saying what we need to do is to be able to tell the board what the real issues are, not just the numbers.
Well,
And so I would like to see, if Krieger and Stewart has a person who is working on, the city's doing this. I mean, this is not rocket
no, I
science.
understand, I understand.
If the city can understand what's going
But
on.
what's it got, what does it have to do with the rate study?
Well,
It's not a real number for us until we get the magic letter that says you've qualified for a lower interest rate on your bond action. Right now, we have to plan for the higher interest rate on the bond action, which will give Mark the data he needs to go do the rate study. He can't, I don't see
I saw a lot of pushback from the board regarding some of the numbers that Mark was pushing, and most of it had to do with him following the general plan to the letter as opposed to
Sure.
pushing things out. What I don't want is to put the fear of God into people about rates when we don't need to. I want to
No,
have
I
a full story.
I understand the difference between cash and carry and debt service, but when we do the debt service analysis, we have to consider the worst
We have to
case.
consider including that, but we don't necessarily have to assume that is it.
I think it has to be it.
Oh, well,
Until we don't have a guarantee that it's going to be less than that. It would
well, see,
be,
that's why we need more information.
well, we're not going to get that in the timeline we have, Stan.
Oh, no, well, that's my point, is that if Krieger and Stewart has someone with understanding of what's going on in the state revolving fund, then that's the only person that we've got right now who understands.
But again, there's no certainty we're going to get that loan, so for the purpose of the
Oh, yeah,
rate
no, I
study,
understand that. There's no one.
the
there's no
purpose of the
cer-
rate study, we need to proceed. I think it's just distracting from what we need to be doing to meet the timeline you want to meet for the rate study. I did-
Well,
I think KNS has
Mark-
someone who might work on grants, but I don't know if they have someone who works on state revolving fund applications. So we'd have to ask Chuck, but I agree, we're just distracting from what we really need to get going
I
on.
think it's important that we understand it, and if it's an opportunity we can take advantage of, we have to take advantage of it, because it's definitely a lower interest rate. We'd be silly not to try to pursue it, but we can't use that lower interest rate in the rate study. That would be suicide, because we will soon find out that, if we find out that that rate's not available to us, then what, Stan? We've got a plan.
I'm not
in
saying
place.
use it. I'm not saying use the assumption that we will. I'm saying what we need to do is include the bounds of the best case up to the worst case and let the board decide that they want to make a decision based upon what.
I don't think the
All
board
right.
would choose the
Now-
worst case. That would be very irresponsible.
Well, but it's still up to the board. That's the point, Don. It's not up to us to tell the board what to do. It's up to us to provide with them what the issues are and what the bounds are and what could happen, and let the board make the decision. And that would be supported by, I mean, the analysis is already there. I mean, all I got to do is increase the top, all right, perhaps. But what we don't have is anybody who understands the state revolving fund and give us what are the odds that we will or will not be.
So if we're going to establish rates in the next month, and we know right now that a bond action, which is something that we know we could apply for, we have a pretty good feel for what our credit rating is, so we could come up with a pretty good estimate of what the interest rate would be. but we have no idea what our eligibility is for state revolving fund, which has a lower interest rate. I don't see how we can bring the SRF into the rate study other than to suggest to the board that if we were later to find that we were eligible for a state revolving fund, that our interest rate could go down and our rates could be adjusted down. We got to set a higher level
Oh,
rate.
no, we have to understand it, I agree. We have to include in the analysis, what if the best interest rate we can get is 4% or 4.5%? But that will also determine how many
Absolutely.
projects, all right?
Or how much debt service we're willing to carry, or how much,
Exactly,
yeah,
so.
I know how they're
So
connected,
it's
Frank.
a small matter of finding somebody who really knows what's going on in the state revolving fund and have them give us their best guess. All of this is estimates of, first of all, where are their interest rates going and what's the likelihood of us getting something? I mean, I don't see that as being a big deal.
Okay, so let's move on to item number 2 then. We'll find
Okay.
somebody that can do that.
Okay, identify capital investment priorities. Now, we're already working on that. We've got a better number for our top 3 and our top 5 than we had before, and I'm assuming that Don's gonna follow through, getting back to Chuck and making sure that we've got agreement between our staff and Chuck. So that's pretty much done.
Maybe just keep us appraised on as that evolves. If there's any changes to this listing that you gave us earlier. If it looks like the top 4 or 5 that you mentioned and the priority of them changes over the next couple of weeks, could you just keep us appraised?
Oh,
in
absolutely,
case-
yeah.
And
Okay, and the next thing, item 3, is to separate the capital investment between the cash capital and the long-term capital investment like we've always done in the past. So there's no change what we've done in the past. What Mark did when he only reported on the cash capital one, he threw all the investment into one line, so it doesn't give the board any understanding of what the actual cash capital it needs to be.
so this is how we currently track our capital, is in one lump instead of 2. We used to do it separately. What was the?
So our budget includes a cash capital line.
Yeah, why did we change it in the past?
We did identify going forward, I mean, we highlight the items that are funded by the COP currently. Yeah, and, yeah, everything else is cash.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we've always done, you know.
Okay.
We've always had in our budget a cash capital
Yep.
and then listed what's in that line. Okay, we need to, now this is getting past the point where I consider the top level, that is revenue and expenses. Now we're getting into how do we distribute the rates. And so what we're going to need to do is estimate the indoor plus the outdoor state allocations. And as far as I'm concerned, that needs to be one of the top criteria for where we put the top of tier 2 is the addition of the indoor and the outdoor. It's what we've done in the past, is the tier 2. And obviously, the state's not cooperating by giving us any real numbers on the outdoor, but we've got to come up with a number. And the staff and Mark are the only place we can get it. We also need to come up with an estimate for the total water pumped. I mean, this is sort of a duplicate of something on the other page. Is right now, the water pumping is going down, primarily because of the replenishment fee. It won't keep going down at the same rate forever. And I'm assuming that it may go down enough to support whatever we think the state law is going to require, but we don't know that for a fact. But we've got to have some rationale for what we think the amount of water we're gonna pump is going to be over the next 5 years, by year. And obviously, it's more critical for the residential than the industrial, commercial. And then number 6, that's again down below the top level, is established replenishment fee distribution. Right now, we're assuming that it's a pumping fee as opposed to a replenishment fee. And that was something that Jim was looking at almost a year ago for me, and I don't know how far he's gotten. We talked about it, I think, at one of our workshops. I know I try to put it on the workshop list every time. I'm not sure if it actually got talked about at the workshop. But we need to decide how we're going to handle the replenishment fee.
So I left message with Jim, if he had any comments on this topic, that we could have his insights for this meeting, and he didn't get back with me. Do you have I looked, so right now, we basically charge a fee per 100 cubic feet regardless, right? It's the same fee, whether you're tier 1, 2, or 3.
Correct.
And your thoughts that you shared at one point was that maybe, the tier 1 folks shouldn't be paying it at all, or what are your thoughts on this
Well,
specifically?
In theory, we're bound by Prop 218, where you should be paying for the benefit that you get. And the tier 1 people and tier 2 people, if we didn't have any tier 3 use, we would be under what we were currently allocated. My feeling is, regardless of how we do it, we should not charge the tier 1 people as much as the tier 2 people. And the tier 2 people shouldn't be paying as much as the tier 3 people. And the obvious thing that comes to mind is, oh, shoot, put a third, and a third. But that's just, just a thought. What we need to do is to have some thinking behind, okay, what's the benefit, and how do we distribute based upon benefit?
Yeah, fundamentally, I agree that the tier 1 folks aren't the ones that are creating the need for imported water.
Yeah.
It's, the higher water users in the valley that are, fundamentally, it feels right, but I don't know if there's any restrictions, and that's what I was hoping to get from Jim. Are we breaking any laws by making some people pay more for the replenishment fee than others? I don't know.
Well, the other question is, are we breaking the law currently because we're having people who aren't going to benefit at all pay the same amount as people who will be benefiting?
I don't believe we're breaking any law, and Jim has stood before, I think you can find it on the record, that distributing it, not that you couldn't change it, but doing it the way we're doing it is equitable and I won't say fair, but there's nothing illegal about the way we're doing it.
Well, and I probably shouldn't have said illegal. That was
Well,
on my
I threw
part.
that out there.
I think in
but
terms of being equitable,
Equitable.
equitable.
I will
Compassionate.
rephrase. I will gladly rephrase. I think that I'm not saying that tier 1 people shouldn't pay any. Just like we currently break all of our costs into partly fixed. Some in tier 1, some in tier 2, and some in tier 3. My feeling is that would be more equitable than what we're doing now. But I don't want to be the one to say that it ought to be this way or that way. But Jim will call you back, and I'm sure he'll remember starting some investigation on that. In fact, I thought he had an associate. And it really goes back to, Prop 218. How do we get people to pay for the benefit? And what is the benefit, that type of thing. So going on to the next page, we've discussed most of these already before. The decision is the debt service increase, assumed inflation rate. We need to have a profile. I mean, obviously everything's an estimate. I mean, we're not going to get good numbers for anything. So we're going to estimate a little bit on we're gonna estimate on the high side, but we can't estimate. It's gotta be somewhat reasonable. Capital investment priority, we beat that to death. Cash capital budget, we've talked about before. Now, going into more details, after you get past the top level of revenue and expenditures, we got to talk about the tier one width. See if that changes based upon any of the current new laws, that kind of thing. Then the tier two width, and my feeling is that's going to change dramatically because of anything the state comes up with regard to the outdoor allocation. And the tier three width, obviously isn't going to be the same as the current tier three width because it's also included in the outdoor. I believe the tier three width was really the backyard or the front, rather than the front yard, and the tier two was front yard. Well, outdoors is outdoors, so tier two and tier three are together. And then the question is, do we need a tier three width? Or can we just eliminate tier four? And right now, I don't see a need for a tier four. But, you know, if there is, then we include it. If we can't find a need for it, we don't include it.
How many
And all of this is below the top level issues.
How many customers do we have that routinely charge at this tier four level? And
Off the
not
top of
chalked
my
up
head,
to-
I don't have it. I mean, it's on WaterSmart. I can get
It's
that.
pretty small, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, unless there's a mistake, somebody leaves their hose on and go for a week with it running, but if it was just, they're,
Well, it's like a
We'll
total of like 9% of the total usage, right? In that ballpark?
yeah, okay.
I wouldn't throw a number out there. I can get you the number, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay, well, I guess that's at
It's a small
45
number.
units, you know, that's like an acre, 36 units is an acre foot. So you're talking about people who are using almost an acre and a half.
It seems like they ought to be paying a higher rate than the people that aren't.
Well, on the other hand, in my mind, you know, the state's gonna give us an allocation of indoor and one for outdoor, and anything above that is outside of the allocation,
Tier three.
you know. So then, what criteria do you use for the top of three? I mean, I'm not saying I'm against having tier four. I'm saying is we need to have, like before, what it was is, I believe it was, if you, the original tier two was front yard zero-scaped. And the top of tier three was, well, the full yard, where they were using 17,000 square feet for a yard, was you zero-scape your whole lot, not just your front yard. Okay, so we don't have, I mean, if we can find a justification for tier four, I'm all for it. What I'm saying is, we shouldn't have tier four just because historically we've had tier four. I mean, historically, we were up to 8 tiers, weren't we, at one time?
Seven?
Seven?
Seven, yeah.
And then we decided, well, we don't need all of these. And now I'm saying maybe we don't need 4. And then again, we've talked about total pumping again already. We have not talked about the ratio of fixed revenue versus the commodity revenue, and that's something that I know that there are more than just me interested in making sure that the ratio of the fixed fee goes down relative to the commodity fee. Right now, the ratio is around 60-40. That is 60 fixed and 40 commodity. And my feeling is we need to look at, and this could go into one of the lower level trades as opposed to the higher level trades, of going to something like 50-50 or 45-55, and having multiple trades that the board could look at and say, yeah, this looks reasonable, this doesn't. But we won't know until we see the numbers.
But the more we favor the fixed rates, right,
I beg your pardon?
Is the commodity revenue is the big variable in the equation here. And if the commodity goes down because of conservation or costs or whatever, and we haven't accounted for that,
Well, that's the reason you want to account for it.
right?
That's the whole point of trying to figure out. See, before what happened when we almost went bankrupt was we asked people
Right.
conserve,
Right.
but we didn't change the rates. So as long as we understand that but the rates can only go so low. At that point in time, we were probably pumping 7,000 acre feet a year. And there was a lot of people that were using it just because it was real cheap. Well, at this point in time, our rates are going up, so people aren't using so much. And quite frankly, my feeling is a lot of the, what I would call wasteful use of water doesn't exist anymore. So I don't think it's going to go down 10%. I think, if we think it's going to go down 5%, we should say, oh, let's assume 6, But even if it does go down 10, if it goes down 5% more than we thought, we lose 5% of the,
Understand.
but on the other hand, we don't pay $2,030 an acre foot for that 4%. And that number is higher, hopefully, than our average use cost. So in the long run, it should be a wash. That is, we lose on the average $1.60 because we don't pump the water. However, we also don't pay the GA $1.60 because we didn't pump it. So I don't think that will matter.
I would just caution the board when you're, with regard to this topic, with changing the ratios too much, if any at all. We obviously have fixed costs we have to cover. And by reducing the fixed, ready to serve and putting more emphasis on a commodity, you're bringing in a higher level of uncertainty because you don't know what your customers are going to be doing for sure.
Right.
And that's what got us, as you pointed out, into that situation where we had to lay off, 25% of the staff.
Well, that much?
Yes.
I'd
Oh,
say
yeah.
that we actually do know that the commodity rate or the commodity use is going to go down, right? We see a trend. So if we're not taking care, if we're not anticipating that by having our fixed revenue,
Absolutely, and I think our financial situation with the current ratios, we're in the good situation we're in because of making sure that we're bringing in the revenue we need to pay our costs through the fixed rate.
Yeah.
I just caution.
I think, see, the problem, Don, is the staff needs to be concerned primarily about the fiscal capability of the water district. The board has two responsibilities. One is the same thing as yours, the fiscal stability of the district. The other responsibility we have is to the ratepayers. And we've been seeing the fixed rates go up year after year after year. And if there's one primary thing that I hear repeatedly from the ratepayers is, I don't pay anything for water, all I pay for are fixed fees.
but
And-
a big piece of that recently has been because of the GA fees. And that's the thing that they're seeing. It's
Oh,
dominating
certainly,
their budget.
well, no, actually, it's just no, because that would be part of the commodity fee. What they're seeing is the fixed fees going up, and if they're only pumping 4 or 5 or 6 units of water, it does make a little bit of difference, but their bill is $40 in fixed fee and $10 in water, even with the increase in the,
I think it's a matter of educating our customers, because I hear the comments too. I've heard somebody say, I only used $3 worth of water, but I paid $45. And it's like, yeah, but you're paying to have that water available to you whenever you need it at the tap. And there's so much that goes into making sure that you have that water available to
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
well, I see your point, and I understand your concern about the stability of the finance of the water district. I mean, that's clear. We're all concerned about that. But on the other hand, my feeling is the way we're raising our rates now, if you're on Social Security and you're retired and you've got an income of $30,000 or $40,000 a year, raising those rates is hard on you. It really is. And we'd have to be sensitive to the people who don't have $100,000 or $200,000 salary. And people who use more water should pay more. I mean, it's really that simple in my mind. And
And they-
people who don't use as much water shouldn't pay as much for the standby. So, but in any event, and that goes, and that issue, of course, goes to the budget scenarios, we need to decide what budget scenarios we're going to give to the full board. The board may have some ideas, and that would be good, because we want to honor the requests if it's possible in the timeline we've got. But otherwise, it's going to be up to us to decide what scenarios to provide them. Because I don't think any of them have been involved enough to know what they want. They know what they don't like, and they'll tell us what they don't like, but they won't be able to tell us what scenarios they really like. In the couple minutes that are left, let me go back to 2 pages further, or 3. It's the top of it is the yearly payment with a 30-year loan. And it does not include the $1.1 million payment. Along the y-axis is the yearly payment, which is the amount of money we'd have to increase the debt service, all right, to pay for the loan. And on the bottom axis, you've got the loan amount in terms of millions of dollars. If you go and look at the line toward the top that says $1 million or 1 million, that is a payment of $1 million. And depending upon going from the blue line, which is the 1.5% line, we could borrow up to over $24 million at 1.5%. Now, even if we get the state revolving fund 1.5 loan, the 1.5 I think is probably optimistic. However, if you go to the yellow line that is to the left at 2.5%, we can still borrow $21 million. And if you go all the way to the gray line, that represents 3.5%, all right, which is higher than what Mark was talking about. At that point, you can borrow $18.6 million. So with a $1 million increase in the debt service, we could fund up to $18.6 million worth of projects.
So this is-
Obviously, if we go to 4 or 4.5, that extends the line further to the left and will obviously fund less. But even at the 3.5%, the point being is, if you look at the need at the lower left-hand corner, is $11.2 million, all right? Now, that's going to increase slightly if we put the 5, we increase by 2 more projects, that's going to go up $2 or $3 million. But nonetheless, at the 30-year loan, we're in pretty good shape. And I'll refigure this based upon
Yeah, once we
these,
get the numbers from
just to
Todd.
see what the numbers look like. And again, getting a number from Ty to say, okay, we know what will happen at 3.5. Where do we need to put it to say, okay, worst case is 4.5 or what? In my mind, if it gets up to 5, what we need to do is take a break and wait a year. Once you get up past 4%, going to a 30-year loan, your interest just goes skyrocketing. And that's not a good investment. You'd be better off doing the critical, 1 or 2 of the critical ones with cash capital, quite frankly. Hopefully, things don't get that bad.
Well, we will find out.
But I will update this
Okay.
to include the updated capital projects to show what the first 5 will do.
So the current plan is portions of this 15 minutes worth of this material
Good luck with that.
is going to be shared on Thursday,
We need to introduce it
right?
and then let them provide feedback is the point. Because until we give them an introduction, they're not going to give us feedback. And waiting doesn't make sense.
This will just help kind of, get us down the road a little bit quicker. But if there's anything in this discussion that, that you and the staff can weigh in on, Ty's number will be very helpful between now and then so that we can refine these documents tomorrow.
Well,
So we can brief them on Thursday. So I know it's very compressed, so there's not a whole lot that,
communications over the next 8 weeks is just critical.
so the president laid down that he'd really like to see, the rate study voted on in the November board meeting. And we're trying to work to that. But
What we need, and sooner the better, is parameters, guidelines, whatever, to provide to Mark so that he can give us a proposal for doing the rate analysis.
And those different scenarios, I think we really need to limit them down to, 3 or something. Hey, these are the 3 we would like to explore. Can you put together the analysis for
And
it?
he has 2, right? He's got,
Yeah, we have 2 basic ones, yeah.
so we'll pick a couple in the middle of those 2, because those are kind of the extremes.
But
Those are both in.
Ty's talking also about like different rate structures, like you're talking about getting rid of tiers,
okay.
limit those down to.
Yeah, probably 3.
Okay.
Otherwise,
3 variations.
there's no way we're making a timeline that we've set.
Okay.
That takes
So
additional.
hopefully, I don't know, well, it's hard to forecast the future, but depending upon how this discussion goes with the board on Thursday, we might be ready to have that discussion with Mark this week. And I'm not suggesting another meeting like this. I think we kind of have the general ideas that Stan's put forward here captured. And we'll know a little bit more about what the board's tolerances are, so we can narrow down those options of variations, different scenarios, and to encompass those concerns that they voice on Thursday. But you might be whispering in his ear, hey, there's some stuff coming, or we've got an aggressive schedule facing us, and whatever he can do to prepare for that would be good.
Right.
I think I've
Because we
lost the
should
bubble
have
here.
this narrowed down by November so we can start the 218 process.
I'm sorry, what are we talking about here?
We're hoping to be able to give Mark guidance so he can start
Right,
his work as soon as possible. And what I
Right.
suggested was that after Thursday, we have had a chance to talk about this with the board,
right.
that we may hear from the board about information, what kinds of scenarios they're interested in having captured in that analysis that we could down select from and provide to
Right.
Mark so he can start that effort.
But right now, we've got 2 scenarios.
Right.
Okay, so my feeling is if there's any interest at all in cash capital, what we need to do is to push the number of projects out. And at the same time, use the same scenario to look at a loan, a debt service. So I can't see doing less than 2 scenarios at the top level. We've already got 2.
Right.
He can hopefully do 2, just a matter of telling him, push this project, these are the 5 projects to work with, and push them out in this order. And then run a cash capital and a
Debt service.
debt service at the top level. And then the only thing to do is to get from the board, are these the 5 that we want to use?
Right.
Or do we want to use 4
Or something different.
or 3? I mean, in terms of critical, I still think there's only 1. And that's the same one that I've always thought.
Okay.
But I don't think we should, I don't want to work with just 1. I don't think that's appropriate. We need to, in my mind, have at least 3, and 5 would be fine as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so we'll do that. That's the path. I'm going to call the meeting to a close. I've already violated my promise to staff that we wouldn't go past noon. I apologize for that. Hopefully, we didn't go too far past noon. Thanks for all your help and insights, patience, and we'll get through this. But we do have a pretty challenging set of weeks ahead of us, so thank you. So we'll close the meeting at 12:06.
Yeah, and if you can get me a number to throw one more line